Well, good afternoon. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining us and the CQL Rehmann Technology Solutions discussion, really going around providing your teams the right remote environment. And it's really a topic that's forefront and at the top of minds for a lot of organizations over these past 6 months, and is relevant now going into the fall as ever. So today we're excited to have industry leaders joining our panel that include, first of all, myself, Eric Erickson, Business Development Manager for CQL. We're going to have a moderator who we're excited to have Jim Karp, who's the Rehmann Chief Digital Officer. And the panel is going to be joined by Sue Hunter. Sue's our CQL VP of Strategy, Jennifer Poplava, Micah Myers, attorney and member. Appreciate having her on board as well. Mark Spack, Rehmann Director of Security and Support Services, and Ryan Anderson with Herman Miller, Vice President of Digital Innovation. So thank you all for joining this discussion and providing your input and expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Eric.
Glad to be here.
So I'm going to kick it over to Jim, and Jim, you're going to run through a little bit of the agenda, and then we'll get the discussion going.
Thank you, Eric, and team. I look forward to talking with you. I recently read a statistic that 75% of the organizations across America have gone remote in some fashion or another. That's about a 250% increase. So if your data is going outside of your environment, there's all types of risks associated with it. So what we've done is we've assembled this panel of experts, and Sue's going to talk about the tools and some of the nuances associated with tools. We're then going to have Jennifer join us and talk about some of the ramifications as your data goes outside from a legal perspective. What are the do's and don'ts that you should be doing? We'll have Mark weigh in from a perspective of how do you set up your IT security controls, big picture to make sure you got a lot of things covered. And then Ryan, with a lot of his experiences of working with the remote teams, is going to sew everything together for us. With that as the backdrop, then, what we're going to do is start with you, Sue. And there's a lot of tools that are out there that organizations are leveraging. They're having different experiences with them. What are you seeing in the field, and what are some of the topics you'd like to discuss?
Sure. So I think it's really interesting to note that many organizations are going through this transition, as you said earlier. In fact, CQL also went through a similar transition prior to the current pandemic that we're in. We were primarily doing work in offices and have completely transitioned to a remote workforce at this point. I think that there are about 4 different types of tools that organizations need to have in place to have successful remote teams who can collaborate and work effectively together. These would be the types of tools we would consider are video conferencing, messaging, file management and collaboration, and project management software. So I'll go through each one of those in a little bit more detail. With those 4 tools in place, organizations can probably get about 75% towards a completely remote collaborative workforce. With video conference, this really is replacing meeting rooms and conference rooms of the physical office. What we find to be most effective, though, is if people are all using video, kind of like we are here. It really helps promote a personal and human connection and provides that human touch that we really enjoyed in an in-office environment. So video conferencing, there are many tools out there. The second tool set is around messaging, and these are tools like Slack or Chatter, and this is helping teams foster real-time communication and discussion. This type of software helps take the place of in-person conversations, such as stopping next to a coworker's desk to ask a quick question, or walking into your supervisor or your manager's office to have a quick chat. So these are really good for real-time, immediate needs, quick conversations, quick chats that you can't actually have in the office right now. The third type of software is around online file collaboration and file management. And this is where the collaboration is really happening. In the past, people would be passing files around through email and through software, but now we have tools that help us work on documents, both in person or together synchronistically or separately asynchronously. So we can work together on documents, spreadsheets, and presentations. And oftentimes we pair this software such as a Google Doc or Google Sheet with a video conference meeting where teams are meeting together to work on things together. And then the last software or tool that we see in effective remote teams is project management software. So these are tools that really help provide visibility into the work that different individuals and teams are performing. This is very instrumental in helping ensure that remote teams are delivering work, but it's providing them with clear expectations of what that work is. So with those 4 tools, that gets us really close to having effective tool set for collaboration. And outside of that, you might see some specific or individual teams augmenting that. So for example, at CQL, we have visual designers and UX designers, and they have tool sets that facilitate collaboration amongst their team and discipline. So they'll use InVision for discussing and providing feedback on wireframes and comms. Our software developers are using other tools to collaborate, such as GitHub and Jira, and those tools help them make sure that they're in sync with other developers and with their project managers and other teammates who are working together with their work. So you probably can get very far along using video, messaging, online file tools, and project, and then certain teams would have to augment. I'd be really curious to know in the software side from Jennifer for security or Mark, are there other software that your teams are using to enhance collaboration?
Well, speaking from the context of just my law firm, it's been an interesting transition to working remotely because attorneys are justifiably known as not being terribly nimble when it comes to making big changes in how they do things. So it was interesting to get people to make that shift. Fortunately, we had started using Microsoft Office 365, and so Teams was available to us. So we started at the very beginning using the Teams tools, but it was an interesting process getting people ramped up. And I think that that's one of the bigger challenges that my clients have had as well, where they didn't have that universal knowledge of use of some of the tools pre-pandemic. It was difficult to train people after they were already remote in how to use those collaborative tools.
Right. You have it was trial by fire.
Exactly.
So that's a great question, Sue. And, from the technology side, a lot of the tool sets that we depend on a day-to-day basis, I think about like Skype for Business, you think about Microsoft Teams, you talk about Slack. A lot of those tool sets from a technology perspective, we have a lot of those things that were already in play, prior to the pandemic coming on the scene. And so really from a transitional perspective, we were already kind of behaving in sort of that way. But it was really more of okay, now this is a full-time thing. This is not just it's not just an optional nice to have. It's now hey, we depend on this tool, and it's now more critical to the operation of the business and how engineers and staff communicate with each other. So we've been very dependent on Teams, very dependent on using Slack as well. And then also Skype for Business. So it's kind of interesting. Obviously, Microsoft is still in that transition of getting everybody over to Teams. But overall, it's been a pretty smooth transition for us.
Yep, we had a very similar experience. In fact, I think one of the main challenges we had moving from an in-office environment to purely remote, which we still are, is actually the work environments at home. We had people stop into the office, grab their monitors, grab their equipment. So what we've actually found is that our team has been more productive when they actually have a very good home environment set up to facilitate work. So it wasn't just the tools, we actually had all the tools in place. It was about having a space where an individual could be productive and collaborate with teams. So it starts with things like making sure you have a comfortable desk and comfortable chairs and the right headphones. But then other team members, such as our developers, really needed more, bigger monitors, multiple monitors. I'm in strategy. I still needed a whiteboard. So I'd really be curious, Ryan, from your perspective, being at Herman Miller, this is sort of your bread and butter, and you understand and have the research around how important the home environment is. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, so for those that don't know Herman Miller, I mean, we primarily are known for making furniture, and that's true for office furniture, home office, residential, you name it. And we've studied these sort of environments for a while. In fact, we first started our study of remote work years ago. And I've often thought of remote working as an inclusion challenge. So if we go back like a year or two ago, the kinds of scenarios you would hear about is that everybody's in the room except for two people. Those two people that are remote can't be heard on a speakerphone. People forget to ask them questions. And then we saw this major kind of seismic shift. And in some ways, it's really good because when we're participating in a synchronous meeting like this, everybody participates equally. There's no metaphorical head of the table, but different inequities begin to show up. One of them is your space. You know, am I comfortable? Am I trying to work from a dining room table? And it's not just the ergonomics, it's acoustical distraction, it's visual distraction. And it's things like Wi-Fi availability, right? So like now, I think the people that have biggest challenges are maybe you're rural, don't get good bandwidth, maybe you're a parent of young kids and managing distractions is just at a whole nother level for you. So I think organizations are just beginning to realize that that total experience of working from home, the technology is important, but there's a whole host of things that you can attend to help people to be successful or not.
And another element that'll fold into what I'll discuss in a little bit about intellectual property protection, you need to find a space where you can have a private conversation. And I have had coworkers and clients taking meetings from their vehicles because it was the only place in their house where they could actually have a conversation that wasn't being overheard. And if they were discussing a sensitive subject or something that they couldn't have other family members who may be home working as well, or kids who were home, they had to be very creative about where they could have that private conversation to preserve the secrets that they were talking about. That's something that I don't think very many people thought about at the beginning of all this, but they're finally able to work through as well.
No, I'll just add on to that. I mean, some of the scenarios we hear a lot are maybe somebody's in a small apartment, they've got a roommate, they're in New York, they can't easily get out. Other times you've got spouses and older kids all trying to work simultaneously, in some cases from the same guest bedroom where they've set up multiple desks. We've seen, like, if we go to East Asia as an example, working from home for an extended period of time is almost impossible. People go into office because it's not just the tools, but the space that they need to be productive. So it's a really broad array of conditions that people might face. And having others just like on top of you is not only a security challenge, it's just rough in terms of your personal productivity.
Hey, Sue, you've done a great job including other people as part of the dialogue. One of the things you want to talk about was barriers and along those lines. So what are your thoughts on those?
Right. I think the actual physical environment and space setup is probably the number one barrier to collaboration and being successful with remote work. So I think Ryan touched on that really nicely. The other piece that we've observed as an organization transitioning to remote workforce is the new employees that are coming on board into our organization, and making sure that when we're not in the office environment, we're actually onboarding them very effectively, both to the company, to their own teams, to their projects. So onboarding approaches has become much more important to us as the organization to help new team members more easily fold into their overall work environment, making them feel part of the team, making sure that they have the right connections and know who it is that they need to be reaching out to when you can't physically see them there. So that's an area that's really become more important to our organization. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, there are so many tools, but making sure you do have the right tool for your specific discipline or industry can make or break your ability to be collaborative and work effectively remotely. So evaluating tools and reevaluating tools to make sure you have the right set in play is very important. It's not a one and done. It's something that needs to be revisited as work continues to shift and evolve, because it will, and more tools will come out, and we will continue to see this way of working mature in the future.
How about pitfalls? You've expressed some pitfalls that you've come across as well.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a tendency from the management level to want to over communicate and request too much meeting and scheduling with their employees. So there's this tendency to want to micromanage employees that you can't physically see as much as you used to be able to. But this can be easily mitigated by making sure you have good project management tools, very clear goals and expectations, and target completion dates for the work that's being done. We use a variety of tools such as Jira and Asana, and it takes some of that management oversight responsibility away, because those tools are sending notifications, you're getting automated updates, and so there isn't the same level of need to check in with employees on a really micromanaging sort of a basis. So a lot of these tools can help take away some of that, and you just have to trust your employees. If they have the right expectations and the goals in front of them, give them the freedom to accomplish that work and complete it on the time frame that is expected from them. I think that that's the main shift I've seen from a lot of the teammates here, is making sure we're not over communicating and not trying to micromanage. Checking in is still very important, but giving them staff freedom to do their work the way they need to and how they need to is really more important now than it was before.
How about talking about important stuff? How about fostering teamwork, collaboration, etc.?
Right. There's a lot of employees who feel disconnected when they're working remote. And so in this current environment that we're in, we really need to make an extra effort to provide a chance to have those human connections, have more social connections. And there's a lot of great opportunities to do that. So in our current situation, we use Slack, as many organizations do or are doing. And we have channels that are just there to socialize and to connect with our colleagues and to share interests. We talk about travel and food and movies and games. And so there's a place for people to connect on a regular basis just through some of these messaging boards. But then there's also other opportunities in team environments. Our design team is doing coffee talks. Sometimes we have virtual happy hours just to connect with people. On a weekly basis, we do team shout outs to acknowledge where good work is being done for each other and our clients. And then more formal, but still good to connect is Workshare. So we meet on a fairly regular basis to share the work that we're doing across teams and across projects. And it gives a chance outside of your normal day-to-day work to really see what your colleagues and your peers are creating when you can't stop by their desk and look at what that output is. So there's so many opportunities, and there are a lot of ideas out there, but those are just some examples of what we're doing at CQL to make sure that teams stay connected on a regular basis through all the channels that we have available to us. And I'd really love to hear other ideas, because we really want to have an inclusive workplace, and these social connections are a key way to help teams feel connected with each other.
You guys got any thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah.
No, I love what Sue shared, because we've actually been doing that as a team, where, you know, one of the things that's so key is, how do you carry your culture forward? So you've had this established culture within your business environment, within your office. How do you carry that now into more of a virtualized setting? And so we've been continuing to do, you know, huddles with our team and maintain that same type of interaction schedule that we would normally have. We've changed it up a little bit by doing question of the day and taking opportunities to learn a little bit more about each other. So, you know, anywhere we can where we can keep that culture and keep that touch point is very, very critical to not really only the staff's morale, because you don't know their situation, what's going on in their home, their setup, and kind of what's going on there. So it's really, really important to maintain that touch point with your staff and maintain that morale. We've found that that's been a great way just to manage through the pandemic and just kind of have a sense of where everybody's at. So those touch points and carrying that culture through has been very important.
Great. Jennifer or Ryan, any thoughts?
Very similar to what both Sue and Mark have mentioned. We've continued on we have different practice groups within our firm, and so the practice groups will have their own meetings, and those have continued, but now they're all virtual, and there's been a lot of communication funneled through those to our attorneys, and then on a broader scale to the firm as a whole. And it's, again, it's been a challenge because we've got a variety of technical competencies. So something like a Slack, we have people who would not be comfortable participating in conversations via Slack. So we've had to be more traditional with how we communicate. And a lot of it is just through good old email.
Yeah.
Ryan, any things you guys are doing?
Yeah, well, what came to mind as Sue was giving those examples, and those are really good examples, are that we've studied fully remote companies since about 2013, it was considered kind of unusual for a furniture company to look at companies that had no office space, but we've learned a lot from them over the years. I don't think that's the optimal situation for most, but this notion of staying connected with your secondary network, or what sociologists would call weak ties, is this kind of critical facet. So you've got like those 20 people in your work life who you're going to have a call with, or you're very likely to send an email to, and then there's probably dozens or even hundreds of others that are really important to you staying connected. It's how you learn, it's how you grow, it may be where your career opportunities come from, it's how you feel part of the organization. Honestly, that's where physical office space has added the most value for a long time. Churchill once said, we shape our buildings there after they shape us. So it's part of that sense of belonging. Everything that was just described in terms of like these little social connections, anything that's a little unexpected is very helpful. And I would also say, including people who don't expect to be included, they're not in your work team, they may be a key consultant or friend of the organization that you haven't talked to in a while, is really helpful. Where this probably will go is towards a hybrid, remote, co-located sort of scenario. But organizations tend to view this as binary, like you're in the office or you're remote. And that's just not really where things have been headed. It's far more common with really healthy organizations with a distributed workforce to see that people will still come in, but not every day. So like Gallup has been doing engagement surveys for ages, and just in January, they released their most recent report showing the highest levels of active disengagement are among those who almost never work remote and those that come into the office 20% or less. And so they recommend on average, 2 days a week, something like that is optimal. And I think that's probably, once we get past COVID related stuff, what you'll see is that, yeah, we've learned how to be remote, but keeping in touch, feeling like you're part of something bigger, having that sense of belonging, keeping in touch with your secondary network, there's still a really important role for space.
I agree.
To do that.
I would augment that. So CQL has been surveying its employee base to see what is the interest of more of a long-term remote solution. And I would say that the hybrid model is actually where we've seen a lot more interest, where people who were used to coming into the office every day want to come in 1 or 2 days a week, like you said, Ryan. And so there's just a lot more people who are more interested in that because they do appreciate the time that they can come into the office and see people. And I think setting up an office environment that supports this more hybrid model is where we'll see some transition in office spaces in the future.
Well, you just nailed it with that last one, because if in fact workplace becomes a destination, it's on demand, it's not a requirement, but it's a high value option, then you have to design it for that, which most aren't. Correct. So we do see some opportunity there for an organization like ours. But yeah, if you talk to most people, and we've been doing surveys about this for ages, and you say, hey, would you like to work remotely 100% of the time? Most would say, not really. I'd still like to be able to come into the office. Oh, is it okay that we might expect you there every day? Oh, no, no, I don't want to be expected to be there every day. Give me the chance to work on a given day from where I'm most productive. That might be home, that might be the office, it might be a supplier, consultant, co-working place, coffee shop. Just enable people to have that autonomy, because that's really what was lacking before COVID-19. Remote work was viewed as a privilege or a perk or a special condition, and people didn't know the tools, and then 90 days into it, it was no longer a perk, and most people had figured out, to your point, Sue, the tools, and I don't see us unlearning those behaviors anytime soon.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a good framework to say what have been some of the challenges as people have transitioned. Now, the other aspect of it, and Jennifer, we're going to lean over towards you now, intellectual property. You've got information that used to be behind the wall. Now it's out in the greater world. What are some of the challenges and where do we go from here?
Well, there's quite a few challenges, actually, and I'll start off by giving kind of a broad summary of what we mean when we say intellectual property, because it can mean a variety of things. But in general, when you talk about intellectual property, you're talking about creations of the mind. So one of those categories of intellectual property would be patents, and patents are things to help protect ideas and innovations. Another category would be copyrights, which traditionally protects creation, so works of art, computer programs, other things that are so valuable you don't want someone to copy them and benefit from using what you've created. Another element might be a trademark, which is the category of intellectual property law that protects branding. And then there's a special category, trade secret law, and that protects, as the name implies, secrets. And the value of something that you keep secret is in the fact that it remains a secret, like the formula for Coke. That's the oldest example. Successful because nobody knows what it is, and so nobody can take it and use it and copy it. And then there's also the general category of confidential information that's important to your business and it's valuable, and so you need to keep it protected. And so when you talk about that intellectual property in connection with the sudden conversion for some businesses to a remote workforce, there were quite a few challenges because businesses who hadn't yet become accustomed to allowing access to their intellectual property from remote destinations or remote workplaces were caught a little flat-footed. And whether that is because they didn't have the security measures in place or they didn't have the equipment, they needed to do some catching up to make sure that they are taking appropriate steps to protect their intellectual property. So, the measures that people talk about the most when they're talking about protection of intellectual property are security measures. And I'm going to leave that entire conversation to Mark, who's far more equipped to speak about all those things. I'm an attorney. I have no expertise in security measures and how they work. So I'm going to kind of put a pin in that and let him talk about it later. But what I want to instead discuss are the other security measures that people need to take that they may not really realize they need to be, particularly if they're in an emergency situation. And to help my clients undertake that analysis, what I say to them is, all right, what information would hurt most if it got lost? If your business lost a piece of information, whether they lost it and they couldn't access it, or they lost it to the public and everyone found out what it was, what would hurt your business the most? And most businesses have an idea of what that means to them. And so once they're able to identify what that is, then they can take a step back and say, all right, what are we doing to protect this? And that's where you really start with your analysis of how you protect things. So generally the first stop on the road is to identify what information you have and to figure out where it lives. You may know that you have information about employees, and that's something that needs to be kept confidential, but it's not really something that you own because it's information about somebody else. But you may have a lot of information about how your business is run that you consider to be a secret, and it would be devastating to your business if this is released. Okay, so I ask my clients, do you know who has access to that information? Where is it stored? How is it shared? Do you have a document management system? Do you allow people to email this out, or do you use a shared service? What is it? Is it allowed? And that gets people thinking about how they're managing their information. And the key thought process behind protecting all of these things is you need to take reasonable efforts. And whether it's reasonable security efforts or other reasonable efforts to maintain security, there are certain things that all businesses should be doing, and most of them are, but some of them perhaps not to the level that they should be in order to foster this remote work. And so some of those things might be giving your employees employment agreements that say what they can and cannot do, or having them sign employee handbooks that say these are the things you can and cannot do with our information or with our computers. Well, a lot of businesses before this remote work scenario probably had employment agreements or employee handbooks that said, thou shalt not do work on your home computers. or thou shalt not use your Gmail account to send information back and forth. And all of a sudden they were presented with a situation where it may have become necessary for them to do that in order to continue doing business. And so a lot of businesses have had to kind of take a step back and think about their policies and how to make them workable in an environment like this where they may not have the equipment to facilitate remote work. So it's a challenge for businesses that weren't prepared to deal with that. Speaking personally, my firm was actually fortunate that each of our employees had laptops. And so when the pandemic hit, people were able to take their laptop, their work laptop, and they were able to remotely access our firm system. And that is not always the case. And I know that there are even other law firms in town that had to go out and start buying laptops for people because people weren't prepared to work remotely under those circumstances. So lots of changes to policies as a result of a lot of these things.
So as a result of that, what types of things would you recommend organizations do to make sure that they're protecting themselves from that intellectual property perspective?
Well, I think that they definitely need to do, the formal term is an audit. They need, and it doesn't sound fun, and it's not particularly fun, but it is the process of identifying what important information do you have, where is it kept, what would happen to you if you lost it? And then once they have those answers, they can think through, all right, who are we going to allow to access this, and how are we going to allow them to do that? And how are we going to give them education about how to do business? Because, you know, a lot of employees mean well, and they want to do their work, and they want to do it well, and they may not realize that they're doing things that might put intellectual property in jeopardy. They may not realize that by sending documents from their work account to their Gmail account so they can work on it from home as an end run to getting into the document management system might put the information at risk. Or they might not realize that signing into a public Wi-Fi might put confidential information at risk. And so communication with employees really becomes key in a lot of this, which is not something you can do until you as a business decide your strategy for allowing people to do business while protecting your intellectual property. And I like to say that, you know, attorneys are sometimes the stop sign or the yield sign in these situations, in that we tell people what not to do, or we get a little bossy about what shouldn't be done, but there are always workable solutions to, you know, having a successful business while still having protections in place to protect your important assets. So I'd say the first step for businesses is to actually sit down and think about it if they haven't yet.
Mark, you've got a lot of overlap there with Jennifer, and I know you've got some other ideas as well. And, you know, Jennifer, we just recently went through a SOC audit, and a lot of the things that you're talking about, making sure you understand what your data is, where the data is, the jewels, the crown jewels that we call them.
Right.
I agree with you 100%. It's really important. Big challenges that are out there. Thoughts from the panel in regards to issues from the intellectual property and data that goes out?
You know, Jennifer made some great points there, and I'm going to probably talk about this a little bit more in my section, but she's 100% correct. I mean, a lot of data has now been decentralized. When you think about the traditional enterprise model of castle and moat, where everything that I manage is within my four walls, with cloud, with software as a service, a lot of those things have changed over the time, over these past few years. And how we manage that data, how we assess that data, who has access to it, where does that data live, who's governing that data, all of those different conversations need to be part of that audit process that Jennifer's talking about, because it's no longer just sitting on the racks in my server room, it's now outside of my environment. And so I need to understand what the security posture is of that provider. So we talk about third-party testing and what does it look like for that provider and how are they adhering to the guidelines. So all of those types of conversations come into play when we talk about the security posture. And it's very important to remember that piece of it for sure.
And it needs to be a centralized conversation, because what you do not want is to have employees getting apps that will help facilitate their workload, but may not go through the vetting process that the company would normally give to a vendor. And so, and again, employees won't know that that's a bad thing unless you tell them that they really
Right.
shouldn't be doing that. And these
Right.
are the reasons why they shouldn't be doing that. So
You bet. And shadow IT is definitely something that an organization needs to pay attention to, because there are tool sets and tools available to monitor and manage, okay, where are all these third-party sources where my data could be going that I didn't realize it was going there. So DLP strategies, data loss prevention, making sure I know where my data is being transmitted to is very valuable information to the firm to understand the total picture for their data governance.
Mark, so Jennifer, just kind of putting the wraps on it from your perspective, you've talked about the intellectual property, making sure the policies and procedures are out there. I think also it's important from an education perspective to make sure that it's communicated, right? And everybody understands the expectations.
yes, very much so. And not just protection of the business's IP, but also there should be communication about how employees should be respectful of third parties' IP. Particularly if you have creatives who are, working remotely, they may not have as much supervision. I have had many clients come to me with the misimpression that if it's on the internet, it's free. And so they can somehow, it becomes clip art, and they can take it and they can put it on in their own projects. And that is very rarely, if ever, the case. Even with clip art sites, nothing is ever free. There are always conditions. So I always encourage businesses to have the conversation with their employees to talk about, when is it okay to use third-party content, when is it not, and to also talk with them about software licensing, because, if you have a software license or an application license on your work computer, that doesn't necessarily mean that you also have the right to log in and use it on your home computer as well. So again, lots of considerations, but I think openness, transparency, and communication between business and employees is very important to help protect intellectual property.
Right.
So
Go
I
ahead,
had a
Sue.
question for you, Jennifer. So how are businesses communicating? Is this what you would see in a revised handbook, on an intranet? How does this information get out so that employees have access to it?
Well, it depends on how nimble it needs to be. I mean, if as you probably know, it's no small thing to amend a handbook or to put into place employment agreements. That takes time. And so I generally tell people that they should be having regular training with their employees, whether it's in some sort of pushed out content or whether it's in a meeting. It should be something that people expect. And much like some of the safety and security training that you get through programs like Mark might talk about, like KnowBe4, it should almost be something that becomes automated so that employees hear these things several times. Because frankly, if you write out a bunch of policies and push it out to employees, what are the odds they're actually going to read them? Probably slim to none, because it'll be bulky and it'll be long and it'll be confusing. So delivering the message directly through more informal means is the way to convey the information, but amending the policies in light of everything that's gone on to make them workable is also something that should be done.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've had a chance to talk about the environment, rolling things out. We've talked about intellectual property. Let's switch gears here. Mark, there's a whole bunch to IT security. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, one of the big things with, a lot of this transition to remote work and us taking these endpoints off site is now they're no longer within the four walls of my business. So when you think about all your firewall technologies, all the investments that you've made from a security perspective within your environment, you're now leaving some of those protections behind. And now you have more and more users that are exposed directly to their own internet connection. So you're heavily dependent upon how you've configured that endpoint, how you've secured that endpoint to make sure that you're protecting your users. So, like one of the things that I throw out there as a strong recommendation is, for instance, just removing the administrative privilege from a user that uses that asset on a day-to-day basis. So it has been proven that if you remove that admin permission, that you can eliminate anywhere between 96 to 98% of the threats that the user could potentially face just by removing that admin permission. And then when you add in things like application whitelisting, where you're actually determining what are the applications that are safe to run on this asset, you even further bolster that protection and you eliminate a lot of the threats that your users are going to see. But some of the big things that are a little bit more tricky now for IT departments to manage is now that this endpoint is now disconnected from my network, how am I going to keep it up to date? How am I going to patch it? You know, previously I would have had centralized patching. I could easily roll those updates out and manage those endpoints. It now becomes a little bit more tricky. So now how am I going to manage that patching, especially on the third-party applications? I have to make sure that I'm keeping pace with all of those updates and making sure that as they get released, that I'm staying on top of those update cycles. You know, other things for the endpoint is like Windows Firewall, having the firewall enabled. Those are very important settings that you can enable on the endpoint to make sure that we protect that endpoint from anything else that may be on the same network that we didn't know about. We want to protect that endpoint. And of course, at a minimum, we want to have that antivirus, anti-malware protection. A good base layer of protection is very valuable to that endpoint. But even more so now, because a lot of the attacks that we are now seeing have become much more advanced. When we talk about malware attacks, they're moving to a fileless structure and they're much more difficult to detect, and they're now just running in memory. They're not even writing anything to the hard disk anymore. So we now have to have more advanced tools in place to actually monitor and protect that endpoint. So we talk about endpoint detection and response. You want to have a tool set that's there that's going to be able to protect the user should they make a mistake. And so that really kind of gets me into my next section, which is how do I protect my users from a phishing attack? It has been shown that phishing attacks continue to be the #1 attack vector that's used. Why? Because it still works, it's still effective, and it's the cheapest for them to execute. And so what we continue to see is that these phishing attacks are getting through. So that's why we talk about on endpoint protection, defense in depth. You want to have layers of protection so that if that something were to get past that user and a mistake is made, we now have that endpoint detection and response in place to capture the threat, quarantine it, and make sure that that user remains safe. So making sure that you have a comprehensive spam filter in place, that's a really important way to make sure that you are getting rid of as many of those phishing attacks as you possibly can. And then again, having that defense in depth should something sneak past and get to a user. And that gets me to my next one, which is an important one, is we think of companies that need to protect their systems, they need to protect their intellectual property, they need to protect their assets. They invest a lot of money in the technology to protect their business. But part of the problem is that we've not been investing in or evolving what I like to call the human OS. And it's the human understanding of what these phishing attacks are trying to do, what they look like, and being able to understand when I'm being phished and the warning signs that I need to pay attention to. So one of the things that I advocate for is making sure that you have ongoing security awareness training for your users. And this is a journey that you take your users on to start them off very easy. And you want to ramp up that level of difficulty so that when they get the really sophisticated attacks, they're going to be able to sniff them out and they're going to be able to protect your organization. So this is more really than anything, it's more a human problem than it is a technology problem. And the attackers know this. They are very, very good at social engineering. They run as an organized crime outfit. They have teams that are dedicated towards social engineering. So the days of grandiose misspellings and kindly being in the email itself, we've seen a lot of that stuff go away, especially with the pandemic and COVID. We've seen a lot more emphasis on health scare information, using information from the CDC, using information from the WHO. We've even seen the attackers actually take the point, because so many people are working remote, that they're saying they're actually using meeting invites and they're actually using offboarding as some of their subject matter. And it's actually catching people off guard because they would not have anticipated that. So, we have to recognize that all of these different things that the businesses are facing, the attackers are capitalizing on those opportunities. They're seeing the pressure that businesses are under, they're seeing the pressure that the remote workers are under, and they're going to capitalize on that. So again, two important things. Let's protect that email as much as possible. Let's eliminate as many phishing attacks as we can. And then let's train our users. Let's use a platform like KnowBe4. And it's been proven to reduce overall the threats to the business by educating your users. So, outside of that, it really gets into connectivity, and how do we secure all of our users that are working remotely. And one of the big things that I like to talk about is making sure that we're using good, strong passwords. The days of 7 or 8 character passwords are behind us now. We are now to the point where we should be talking about 12 and 16 character passwords. We have to continue to evolve our password strategy. And we also have to make sure that we're not reusing that password in other places. If that password were to get compromised, we don't want them to get access to all of our other systems and resources. So we want to be very cautious about where we're using that password. And really the big problem is what causes us to do that? Well, it's really tough to remember 30 passwords. And so that's where a password manager comes in. Those are very effective tools. So you think of a tool like LastPass or 1Password. Those are some great ways that you can manage all of the passwords that you need to manage for all of the accounts that you need to access, keep them secure, and then make sure that using that tool, you can generate random secure passwords that can then be used across multiple platforms. But we want to be very careful that we're not using the same password across all the web services that we use online, and we log into the company with the same password. We don't want to do that, okay? Next one would be really looking at using a VPN. And really where we're at with remote work, I would imagine that there's a lot of businesses that have remote workers that are using VPN. They had to rapidly purchase VPN licenses and spin some things up and make that available.
Hey,
But
Mark, VPN, can you define that for people in case they're not familiar with the concept?
You bet, absolutely. So that's a virtual private network. And basically what that does is that creates a secure session, a secure tunnel between your endpoint and back to the office. And that is your connection where if you need to access any resources that the company is making available on its systems internally, that you can then access those systems securely from your endpoint working from your home. So it's important that we have that deployed. And it's also important to make sure that we've narrowed the scope of what that VPN can access. So if an attacker is able to get to that remote endpoint, if he's able to compromise that endpoint, and now I have a VPN session back to the office, I want to be very narrow in the scope of what that endpoint can access. It should not have carte blanche access to the entirety of the network, that it can't talk to all of the infrastructure, it can't talk to all the servers. It should only really talk to what is needed for that user to complete their job function. So we want to limit the scope of what that VPN is accessing to make sure that we're protecting not only the user, but we're protecting those internal assets. Outside of that, we also talk about multi-factor authentication. If any of us have a banking account around here, we've been doing this for quite a while. We're pretty used to it. But I know that there's still some that go, man, why do I still have to have that second factor of authentication? Well, I'll tell you what, the threat actors that we're dealing with, they are all about stealing credentials. And that multi-factor authentication is that second factor. It's that second question I'm going to ask you. It's not only something I know, but it's also something that I physically have. And that is your second factor of authentication. So we want to make sure that we're implementing that. So when we think about accessing like Office 365 or accessing our VPN, when we talk about, maybe some SaaS-based applications, or even just anything that's cloud-based that we need to access, we can add that multi-factor authentication as an additional check and balance, so that if you got into a situation where someone did potentially harvest your credentials, they would not be able to access your account because they don't have that second factor of authentication. So we talk about multi-factor. It's very, very critical at this point, and it really should be the default standard across all of your applications. If it supports multi-factor authentication, let's make sure that we're getting that implemented and we're using that. Another big one that we've seen with this big, quick rollout to remote work has been many companies that maybe have made quick firewall adjustments and made remote desktop available outside the firewall. So when you think of remote desktop, it's the ability for you to be able to connect to your workstation or connect to a server from your home and be able to log in just as if you were sitting in the office. Well, the problem is that when we've made that available now outside the firewall, the attackers know this. And so they're actually doing brute force attacks against these remote desktop sessions that are made available outside the firewall and actually compromising client systems as a result of that. So we want to make sure that Microsoft Remote Desktop is always behind the firewall. It is never outside the firewall. So if we are configured that way, we definitely want to take a look at that. So outside of that, really just some final recommendations is really, it kind of comes back to just physical security. So it's just some of the basics. You know, when we talk about working on our workstation, when we get up from our workstation, let's make sure we lock it. You know, Windows L, it's a really fast keystroke. Let's make sure we lock our workstation. We don't always know who could potentially come into our home, who could come into where we are presently working, walk up to our laptop, potentially have access to sensitive information. So locking up our workstation when we step away is a very, very basic and very important point. Same thing with keeping our mobile assets on our person. We don't want to have that theft situation take place. So if we are working in an unfamiliar area and we do need to step away for a period of time, let's make sure we take that asset with us. We don't want to have the risk of that asset coming up missing. So again, physical security, it sounds very basic, but can be very, very helpful in protecting those assets that we have out there. Additionally, this is a big recommendation I'm going to give. We're seeing a lot of increase in ransomware. It's been in the news a lot. This is going to continue to be a big conversation. We're going to see more of it in 2021. The statistics are lining up that it's going to be a very, very busy year. So I would encourage our clients, please make sure that your data is backed up. Please sure that it's been verified on a daily basis, that we have those backups that are taking place. We want to make sure that it's replicated off-site. We want to make sure we have an additional copy that's not accessible to a potential threat actor, because that is your recovery position. If you don't have that recovery position, it becomes very difficult in a ransomware-related event to come back out of that. So let's make sure that you have those backups. Let's make sure they're off-site. Let's test them and make sure that they're working. And then finally, let's make sure we have a cyber liability insurance policy. Those are things that are going to greatly protect your business and make sure that you're prepared should a security-related incident come to your business.
Okay, so Mark, you've covered a lot there. Thoughts or questions from the panel? We've, you know, just if we step back, we've talked about what tools can we potentially use. And then based on that, what's the important data that we have to protect? And now we've talked about how we can protect it. I see Jennifer's got a thought and a comment. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I just wanted to echo what Mark said about the importance of cyber liability insurance, because this is something that is often not covered in your standard general liability policies. And if there is coverage, it might be limited to something like $5,000, which is in no way enough to cover breach remediation and notification, because if you do suffer an intrusion, to add its insult to injury, you may also be required to let people know that this happened to you. And the cost of analyzing whether you need to do that and then actually going through the steps of telling people about it can become quite expensive. So most of that is covered by a special rider or a standalone cyber liability policy.
Thank you, Jennifer. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, so again, we've talked tools, we've talked intellectual property, we've talked about how can we protect ourselves. Let's look at the big picture. What are you thinking, Ryan?
Well, first, let me just say, I've learned a bunch. I've been taking notes. I didn't even know cyber liability insurance was a thing. So appreciate all the insights. A couple of thoughts, and I'll be brief because I know we're running a little bit long. But one is just, I think we were basically on a journey towards seeing more remote and distributed workforces for 10 years, right? I mean, even longer. We really became mobile when Wi-Fi and laptops became ubiquitous. So that was what, 2005, 2006. What's happened is this massive acceleration of all of these topics at once. So I think we would be talking about all this stuff 10 years from now, but most organizations would have probably parsed through what are we doing in terms of the digital dexterity of the workforce? What are we doing in terms of deploying the right cyber measures? The challenge is, boy, it's all upon us right now. And so I think that part of the challenge is just overwhelming. And the more that organizations can say, all right, we've had a short-term crisis, But as I mentioned before, learned behaviors are not typically unlearned. What does it look like to begin to ramp up a longer term strategy? This would be a really good time to do it. And I think we should continue to try to stay in lockstep with what the employees are telling us. So as an example, I was thinking a little bit about all of the free, available, democratized, cloud-based software that's out there, and the fact that most people love a freemium option. It's also the responsibility of an IT team, yes, to police shadow IT, but to make sure that they understand the needs of their users, right? So if somebody's adopting something, they feel it makes them very productive. It's one thing to say, hey, we're not comfortable with it. The bigger challenge is, what exactly are you trying to do? Let's come up with a solution that works for everyone, and then let's train everybody to get on it. I think one specific thought that I definitely want to hone in on, and it goes back to what Sue was talking about earlier in terms of the way teams behave, is she touched on the topic of synchronous versus asynchronous collaboration. And it reminded me of, there was a great piece by Matt Mullenweg, the CEO of Automatic, one of those remote only companies, where he talked about the 5 stages of remote work. And I've seen a few different frameworks like this. I do think it's good to remember that people are on a journey and that we're transitioning through it. So in that case, one of the things he talks about is that one of the very first things that remote employees will try to do when they start working remotely is to replicate whatever they did when they were co-located. So I've worked remotely for years, by the way. I'm 40 miles from Herman Miller, but I'm one of those people that went in 1 or 2 days a week. And I could not believe in the first month of quarantine the number of video meetings on my calendar. I mean, it was killing me. And video fatigue is a very real thing. It messes with our cognition. We've been staring at these cameras roughly 2 feet away from us, trying to interact with each other as human beings. You can do it for an hour or two. Good luck doing it for 7 hours a day. For months, it messes with your head, and it presents other issues the more distributed the workforce gets, right? So the more you've got people in different time zones, or you've got people dealing with trying to make dinner or trying to homeschool kids or whatever, those synchronous forms of collaboration that require everyone to participate at once become extremely limiting. And it's often what just burns people out. And so I think it's very helpful for organizations to begin to say, all right, what does it look like to collaborate asynchronously? So you're still part of an overall process where you're working together, but you're doing it when people have available time. I think Google Docs and the Google Suite, 10 years ago, gave us a chance to build a document together. People began to realize, oh, I can create it, I can send it to Jennifer, she can add some comments, Mark can weigh in, it's asynchronous, it's very effective. Slack took it to the next level. I think what Microsoft has done with Teams is essentially take, I hope it's okay to say this, the best of Zoom and the best of Slack in some ways, and said, you've got synchronous, you've got asynchronous. The more that organizations can help people to realize that they can be very productive without having to force everyone into lots of scheduled meetings, the better, and the more sustainable it is. As an example, Wharton School of Business years ago looked at brainstorming, and they did this little A/B experiment where they brought a bunch of people into a room and said, all right, everyone, time to come up with some new ideas. And they had the belief that people would feed off each other. And, oh, Mark said that, and now Sue's going to say this. Then they did a separate experiment where they said, everyone, please think of some great ideas, and then come together and we'll talk about them. Well, they said the second method was 2.5 times more kind of successful, both in terms of the number of ideas, but more importantly, the quality of the ideas, because it gave people the chance to just think on their own terms. So I've been in meetings like in the last month where one of my teammates has said, you know what, I don't know that we're getting that far. Why don't we end the meeting? Everybody think about this today. We'll reconvene for half an hour tomorrow, or we'll post something on Microsoft Teams. And that is just like a gift. So just like we talked about with hybrid remote versus co-located environments, that same sort of dynamic equilibrium teams are going to get to in terms of their processes, their collaborative processes, their ability to become more dexterous digitally, to be more secure, et cetera. And I think what all of us have to do is just this kind of ongoing pulse check to see, are we progressing as an organization in terms of our ability to support distributed work, or are there things that we're just stuck on that are holding us back? And it could be any of the topics we talked about. And then as a leader, do what you can to just continue to prototype and move the process forward, because like I said, we probably just experienced 10 years of acceleration in 6 months, and now we're all just trying to catch back up.
And it's amazing how things have been dragging out too. So we don't know how long it'll be, And it's definitely given us a good stretch. Good points. Additional thoughts and comments, team?
I think Ryan summed it up beautifully. This is a permanent shift and companies are still learning how to adapt. I totally agree with what you said about over conferencing on video meetings all day. And I feel like companies are at the point now that we're 6 months into this, figuring out we are overscheduling people. And I'm starting to see a shift in more normal daily schedule. So
we had conversations about that, right, Sue, earlier on?
Zoom fatigue is real.
Yeah, the one other quick thing I'll add is, and we all know this, but people don't feel comfortable adopting new technologies or new processes when they're being held to a deadline or they're right in the midst of a project. I always find ways of helping teammates to play. So I've got a Microsoft Teams project called Blackbriar because I'm a big Jason Bourne fan. It's a fake team with fake content, and I tell people, I'm going to ask you to join a Teams group in another few days. In the meantime, will you go play on this, try to post a GIF, see if you can create a document, like just goof off. You won't screw anything up. And then when it's time for them to jump into a group that might already be using a tool, it is so much more comfortable. But we've just got to give people the chance to, like I said, accelerate in a safe way.
Thank you. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would actually add in, I think, really from a security perspective, businesses have been asked to do a lot. If you think about all of these different adjustments, all the things that we've needed to do through this pandemic, it's a lot to take in a very rapid manner. So, from a security perspective, I would just encourage, assess your posture, assess your position, take a look at where you're at with your endpoints, take a look at where you're at with your security posture. And start taking some bites of the elephant. This is not something that you can necessarily get done in a week, but you can take good steps now. Identify, where is my data? Where is my sensitive information? How is it being protected? What does my policy say? Am I following my policy? Audit yourself and say, yep, I'm following my policy. We're executing that. And then look at your security posture and say, okay, where are some areas where we're deficient? How can we start to move the needle forward? Take small bites and start today.
Totally agree with that, Mark. And I would also add that if you find as you're reviewing your policy that your practices aren't in line with your policy because your practices work better in a different way, then maybe it's time to update your policy. Because if you have a policy that doesn't work for you, then you need to examine whether the policy should be changed. And I think a lot of businesses keep tunnel visioned and they think, well, no, we have to kind of force ourselves into this. And it may well be important to make that change. So if I leave the group with a final thought, I would say that, businesses, now that we theoretically have a few minutes to take a breath and look back at all the acceleration that we've made over the last few months, analyze your intellectual property, figure out where you have what you need and what you need to do to protect it. And then once you've made decisions, communicate with your employees to help clarify to them what they might not realize are best practices.
Thank you, Jennifer. Eric, at this point, I'll turn it back over to you. Panel, Ryan, Mark, Sue, and Jennifer, you guys have done a great job. Good dialogue today, a lot of good content. Eric, thank you for putting this together. Back to you.
Thanks, Jim. Just really on behalf of the Rehmann and CQL team, your thought leadership and everything that you brought up has been both not only knowledgeable, in-depth, and insightful, but something that really is thought-provoking. And I think the market needs to continually push itself as organizations, as industries, forward through this time that we're in and for the foreseeable future. So these are great things to be thinking about and applying and having conversations within each organization. So thank you all for the time, your expertise. It was greatly appreciated. And as we push this out to our clients, we will, if we have any questions specifically to you, we will make sure that they have the access to connect with you. So Ryan, Sue, Jennifer, and Mark, and Jim, thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of the day and a great week.